So last video I kind of explained a little bit about what experimental aircraft is, and this video I really want to share the backstory about the aircraft that I evaluated, how I went about deciding which kit to purchase, and then really the behind the scenes of purchasing that aircraft, putting a down payment on it at Oshkosh, and then obviously what aircraft did I actually pick. And I look forward to sharing that with you in this video today. Let's get started. As many of you know from watching videos on my channel, back in 2023, I flew the Cessna 140 out of my grass strip for the very first time after an extensive maintenance and restoration on the aircraft, primarily focused on the engine, and got it back running, got it back flying. But I knew within 50 hours of flying the aircraft, it did not meet the mission that I have. My grass strip is 1,100 feet. When density altitude gets above about 3,000 feet, I cannot confidently fly in and out of it, meaning that I intentionally ground myself anytime it gets too hot or the winds aren't right. And it's just very, very limiting for me to use that Cessna 140 out of this grass strip. Because of that, I began to seek a new project. And initially I thought it was going to be another mall aircraft. As many of you know, I owned a mall and got my private and instrument in that aircraft years ago. But that's the aircraft I lost in a wind shear accident when I've told that story here on this channel. But I began to look at malls and realized that the cost of buying a rusted out frame or an engine that was toast and trying to do what I did with the 140 with a mall was going to be very expensive. Almost so expensive that I might as well just consider buying an experimental aircraft and building it. So I began to consider, what is my mission? Like, what does 90% of my most recent logs look like? The vast majority is me and a student at the most. Most times it's just me solo. I do carry my wife and kids around with me on occasion. I have access to a nose wheel mall that has some incredible performance. But it's such a rare occasion that if I focused on just that aspect, I would spend a whole lot more money on an aircraft that I would only use once, maybe twice a month to haul the family in. So what I began to look at was something that had short field capability because of my grass strip, something that had at least 4 seats in it, so that way I could take another couple and we could go out for dinner. Something that would be a good IFR platform, that was tail wheel, that had a decent cruise speed, and then preferably something that had an IO 360 on the front of it. While that engine is now rarer than gold, I do want that, or even the experimental Lycoming 390 on the front of my aircraft, just for the reliability of it, as well as the simplicity compared to a 6-cylinder aircraft. On top of that, I do have some other things that I want to start participating with, like Young Eagle flights, which is what got me into aviation, as well as STOL competitions with the National STOL Group. So I had started considering experimental, and in 2023, just after I flew the 140 out, Oshkosh rolled around, same month actually. And that was my very first time going to Oshkosh. My wife and I drove our family up, and I only stayed for a couple of days that week and absolutely loved it. But while there, the RV-15 from Vans was on the field, and I really thought that would be the experimental aircraft that I build. But the more I looked at it and the more now, there's just a few question marks left about what that kit ends up looking like and the actual performance of it, that I started doing more research. And I was just interested enough to look at statistics and information, but not quite pursuing it enough to make a decision right off the bat. So I had this opportunity to sort of look at multiple kits, multiple experimental aircraft, and really just learn a little bit about the process of building an experimental aircraft. So the first aircraft that I began to look at, and there was a number of aircraft in no particular order that I saw, that I began to evaluate and think about, does that meet the mission that I just mentioned previously? 4 seats, good performance for cruise, excellent STOL takeoff and landing performance, decent fuel burn, things like that. Just the stuff I kind of mentioned earlier to fit my particular mission here coming in and out of this tight grass strip. And the first one that caught my eye was the KITPLANE Series 7. Particularly the TSI one. It is an incredible performing aircraft that comes in about $60,000 for the airframe, less than 200 foot takeoff and landing performance, a useful load of about 800 pounds, a pretty low cruise speed though of 105 miles an hour, and it was a tailwheel aircraft. Just looking at the KITFOX website, it looks like a beautiful STOL aircraft, 2 seats side by side there, so it's not really exactly what I was looking for, but it was very comparable in what I have in the Cessna 140. I started just entertaining, what does it look like maybe to build one of these, just to learn how to build and then go from there. But that was not the only aircraft that caught my eye that year at Oshkosh. All right, so next up is the RAND S21, and this aircraft is still a good-looking aircraft. It's a $70,000 kit for the airframe. It doesn't have as good performance in the STOL department, but it's still 350 feet, so that's acceptable. Still only 2 seats, and the useful load is very similar to the KITFOX, slightly more than what the KITFOX offers, but it does have a significantly higher cruise speed, 145 miles per hour. It's still a tailwheel aircraft, and overall it just looked like an easier build that had good documentation, build manuals, as well as a reputation. This was kind of the second thing there at Oshkosh. I saw it, took some photos, started thinking about it, stuff like that. I continued to look around, and it was actually, I think, the next day that I went back and I was walking past the Brown Arch, past AOPA's tent, headed up into experimental aircraft. And for a split second, I was confused because I thought, what in the world is Maul doing up here in the experimental section? I had a buddy who has a beautiful M9, blue and white M9 that flies around in the Northeast. And I could have sworn and would have sworn that that was his plane that I was seeing from a distance. But it turned out to be a Bearhawk Model 5. To that day, I had never heard of a Bearhawk aircraft. But as I began to walk around and look at it, it had strong steel tube framing, fabric covered fuselage, a flush rivet wing, which gives it a higher cruise speed. And the Model 5 in particular is a 6-seat monster. It's got an IO 540 or the experimental higher horsepower version of that on the front of it. It has some great STOL performance, sub 300 feet, easy STOL performance. It does burn some fuel, but it's got a massive useful load of 1,400 pounds. That being said, all of that comes out to being a higher cost. Beefier airframe, bigger airframe, 6 seats, it's going to be more expensive. The Model 5 comes in at $98,000, and that's for the airframe only. It's got some incredible STOL performance, 250 foot or so for a takeoff or landing. It does burn more gas because it uses a 6-cylinder Lycoming engine typically, either the traditional 540 or Lycoming's experimental 6-cylinder version. It has a massive useful load. It's actually the largest useful load for anything that I looked at, about 1,400 pounds, depending on how you build the kit. It is tailwheel, and like I said, it has 6 seats, which is incredible. What ended up catching my eye about Bearhawk, though, after I, finally picked my jaw up from looking at the Model 5, was the Companion. Now, they didn't have one there. There was not a Companion on the field, but just looking at the photos, it looked identical. I mean, it even had the same paint scheme as my first Maul. So it was a side-by-side 2-seat aircraft. So it's like the 140 in that it's 2 seats, but it had this additional component to where you could take the baggage area and convert it to a bench seat and really have a 4-seat aircraft. So I'm calling the Bearhawk Companion a 4-seat aircraft. It comes in at $82,000 now for its kit cost. It has some great short field performance, 190 feet for takeoff or landing. It's got about a 5-hour fuel endurance at 9 gallons an hour on either a IO 360 or, if you go experimental, the 390 Lycoming version. It's got a useful load of just under 1,000 pounds and a cruise speed of 140 miles an hour, which is great. That's a really, really good cruise speed. It is tailwheel, and like I said, it has 4 seats. So Bearhawk was very impressive while I was at Oshkosh, but there were some other really cool aircraft as well that I saw that exact same day. So while walking around, I saw Zenith's tent, and Zenith has the CH-750 Super Duty, and that is an absolute beast of an airplane. Many of you have probably followed Carson Stinson's build Wearworthy on Instagram, and I love his aircraft. She is a beauty inside and out. Got to see it this past year at Oshkosh, but I really liked the Zenith because it was so much more of a cheaper build to start out with. Yes, it's 2 seats, and it's also a nose wheel. I was looking for a tail wheel aircraft, but it is still very rugged, and the Super Duty especially can take off in 150 feet or so. And at $35,000 for the airframe kit to get started, it's a really attractive build for a first-time build. In addition to that, it uses the Rotax, so it has a very light fuel burn. If you do that, you can put the Lycoming 390 in it, IO 360, anything like that. It will have a useful load of around 800 pounds, but the problem with the Zenith is its cruise speed. It only cruises at 105 miles an hour, which is way below what I wanted. Plus, it's not a tail wheel, and I have really enjoyed flying tail wheel aircraft and would like to continue to hone that skill down the road. So, not to give it away, but the Super Duty, while I really, really liked it, it just wasn't for me. Now, what did catch my eye while I was still at the Zenith booth was the 801. The 801 is a 4-seat version of the 750. There are some differences there. Takeoff and landing is really, really good for the Zenith. It has a kit that comes in at $50,000, and it's got about 1,000 pounds of useful load, very similar to the Bearhawk Companion, as well as the Rans aircraft that we've already discussed. It does have 4 seats, but it is not tail wheel, and again, it has an incredibly low cross-country capability. 105 miles an hour is not very fast, but it's a rugged aircraft. It's all metal construction. It uses some blind rivets, so it would have been easy to build. But that wasn't the only aircraft I saw that day, because after that I went by and I looked at the Vans RV tent, which is a massive spread right there on the corner. So when I got to the Vans tent, Obviously, I wanted to see the RV-15, which was amazing. It's a beautiful aircraft, absolutely stunning, very rugged. It gives off some major Skywagon vibes, and I really did like it. But right now the kit sets at $70,000. They don't really know what its STOL performance is, even though they're test flying it. They're saying 400 feet or so, which is actually worse than I thought it would end up being. They estimate a useful load of about 800 pounds, a cruise speed of 160, which I thought was really good. It is tail wheel, and the only drawback that I really see with it is the fact that it is a 2-seat aircraft. Other aircraft do have that, like I've already mentioned. One of them had the bench that drops in the back. That's probably something that needs to be looked into for this aircraft. For it to have an 800-pound useful load, but then not be able to carry but 2 people, that's not great for anything other than really, really heavy camping. It does have a lot of cruise potential, and that's where the other RVs come into play. The next one I looked at was the RV-12. The RV-12 is a nose wheel 2-seat aircraft, but it cruises at a very impressive 135 knots to only burn about 5 gallons an hour. And with a kit around $50,000, it seems to be a very affordable, although there's low STOL value in this aircraft. It takes 560 feet to get off the ground. It isn't really designed for rugged bush strips. So pretty quickly I kind of assessed it, but sort of walked away from that early on. And I wish that I could make the next one work, the RV-7. The RV-7 for $50,000, it gets off the ground about 600 feet or so. It has some good performance for a 2-seat aircraft, and its cruise speed was an impressive 190 knots. So that is insane. Like that's a true traveler right there. So that with an autopilot, and you could basically fly coast to coast if you wanted. Useful load's only 600 pounds, and again, it's not really geared towards bush fields like mine. So I put it on the list, I evaluated it and assessed it just because I liked it. Anything that I saw that I thought, I really like the way this looks, the numbers I'm saying, I went ahead and assessed it. It's not 100% what I need for this strip. And the last aircraft is actually kind of tied into the fact that I like history and kind of some old school stuff. It was the BD-4 aircraft, which, if you're familiar with experimental aircraft, is considered the first kit plane ever to be sold. And this little booger's fast. The airframe cost about $40,000 or so, and it is not a STOL aircraft. I mean, its takeoff performance, you're looking at like 1,100 feet for this aircraft to get off the ground and get airborne and land. Its useful load's huge. It's 1,150 pounds pounds useful load, and it cruises at an impressive 190. And it is potentially, you can build it as a tailwheel aircraft. It was set up to be built as tricycle or tailwheel, depending on what the builder wanted. And it does have 4 seats. For a long time, I really considered this aircraft. It is a old school aircraft. It looks horrible. It's terribly boxy. It basically looks like a Cessna 177 Cardinal and a cereal box made a baby. Clunky looking, sort of squatty like a Cardinal is a 177. But yeah, I really liked it. I wouldn't mind building one of these days. But those were all the aircraft that I considered, and I really tried to pull a lot of different options, a lot of viable companies, and I spent quite a bit of time in 2023 at Oshkosh visiting these vendors and looking over the different types of aircraft that they had. And I began to do more research at home. But when it came down to it, they all had great assets about them. So I was struggling to figure out, how am I going to make a decision on this, and really objectively, which one of these meets my needs the most. As with anything in life that's difficult to make a decision with, I created an Excel spreadsheet. In this Excel spreadsheet, what I've really done is created a decision matrix. And I'm going to break this down. It's probably going to be on my little WordPress website for anybody that wants to download it and run this on their own. They can plug in 10 different aircraft that they're interested in comparing, and it will objectively spit out the most valuable one based off of the parameters that you put in. So, and I'll put this up where you can see it. I've got all 10 of the aircraft that I previously mentioned listed here, and then I put in the kit, the airframe kit cost, the STOL performance of the aircraft, its fuel endurance, fuel burn, useful load, cruise speed, tailwheel, and number of seats. But the problem is like I have all these different variables. Like I have kit cost, which is in thousands of dollars, STOL performance, which is in feet, fuel burn, which is in gallons per hour. So I need to take all these different units and I need to distill them down to a unit, really a unit list number would be nice, that I can then compare to everything else and say, the lowest kit cost for the highest cruise speed, for the highest useful load, for the lowest STOL performance, you know, depending on if lower is better or higher is better, yeah, it gives a better score, is what I'm looking for. That's really what I would like to see. But I also am trying to weight each of these items because to me, the STOL performance is more important than the kit cost. Paying a little bit more for an aircraft that can get off significantly shorter is more valuable to me. So the first way that I did that is on the second page in the Excel spreadsheet, which is called normalized the data, or I took the value, the numbers, and I ranked them based on the highest and the lowest. I created a scale, and then wherever the aircraft fell on that scale, it either received all the value of that or a percentage of it. So for example, in this first one here, the cheapest kit, which happened to be the CH750, the Super Duty, received at the 20 weight, or out of 20 points, it gets all 20 points because it was on the lowest edge of the range. The Bearhawk Model 5, which was at $98,000, received a 0. It was the least valuable in this comparison. And then everything else that's in that range falls between 0 and 20 for the value. So I just went through and I did what's called normalizing the data. I created a weighted score for this. So back on the first page, I took out of 100% each of these variables and I said, you know, the kit cost, I want to make up 10% of my decision, but the STOL performance, I want it to make up 15%. The fuel endurance, how far I can fly on a tank of gas, I wanted it to make up 15%. The fuel burn and useful load make up 10%. Cruise speed makes up 15% because I would like it to have a higher cruise speed. And then a tailwheel made up 10% of my decision, and then the number of seats made up 15%. I really wanted a 4-seat aircraft, and so anything higher or lower than that just received a lower weight. Then I took all of that normalized data and I generated a totals column on the second page to where I just basically took the weighted scores times the weighted percentage or the value that we got when we normalized this data, and I just added it all up. When I did that, whatever ends up being the highest score, that ends up becoming the data that I'm comparing. And these numbers here, objectively, the higher they are, the better that aircraft meets my mission. Coming in last place was the Zenith 801 at 10th, and that primarily is because of its low cruise speed and its fuel burn coupled with its kit cost and stall performance. At 9th place, I ended up having the Vans RV12, again just because of a lower cruise speed and a very, very low useful load, and also the fact that this wasn't a tail wheel. Surprisingly, the Bearhawk Model 5 came in 8th, but for me and my mission, having a 300 horsepower monster with 6 seats, I fly by myself 80% of the time, and the other 20% I'm with a student doing a tail wheel endorsement. Very rarely do I fly my family around more than once a month to an EAA breakfast, pancake breakfast. So just because of the high cost and the fuel burn and the additional cost of owning a 540 instead of a 360 engine, it fell down to the 8th place. The Kickfox Series 7 aircraft came in 7th, which I thought that was going to place higher. The Vans RV7, which I like so much for its speed, came in 6th, with the 15 right after that. Maybe one of these days I'll build one of these, but right now it just didn't meet my mission. And then we're getting up into the ones that actually kind of came in close. The Zenith aircraft came in 4th place, the Super Duty like Carson built. And that's primarily because of how cheap it was to build. It still only had 2 seats and had a very, very low cruise speed, so I passed on that. After that, we had the Rans S21. That aircraft looks really good, it's just 2 seats. And then in 2nd place, which surprised me because of how old the kit is, was the BD4. And quite frankly, just looking at the numbers here, if it had better stall performance, I would have loved to have built the BD4, and who knows, maybe one of these days I will. But the overall aircraft that took the #1 rank was the Bearhawk Companion. At $82,000 for the kit and less than 200 feet for stall takeoff performance, this aircraft still has a useful load of almost 1,000 pounds and nearly 140 miles per hour for its cruise speed. It's tail wheel, and like I mentioned, it has the ability to go from 2 seats to 4 seats, which I actually like that. I like the fact that if I'm by myself flying around, I have a huge baggage area in the back, but if I want, I can drop a bench seat in and take my buddy and his wife out flying. We can run to Lambert's to get a throne roll, for supper one night. And so that's what ended up winning, was the Bearhawk Companion. Well, that's the most expensive hat I'll ever buy. So I hope you've enjoyed kind of me sharing the backstory about how I went about picking this aircraft. And I look forward to sharing the next video and receiving it from Bearhawk and unpacking that aircraft once I did receive it. And then just sharing the build process in general. This aircraft is a very, very capable plane, and I'm looking forward to building it. I'm looking forward to sharing that process with you, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be interested enough to listen to me discuss how I went about making this decision, which for most people is a huge decision. There are so many kits out there that maybe this method of taking and creating a decision matrix, that might be a little overcomplicated for most people, but for me it was right up my alley. So I set it up, and it was interesting to see that it came up with what I think is going to be a great aircraft for me. I hope you enjoyed this, and again, I look forward to sharing the next one. Have a great day.